Megan. I'm really glad to be having this conversation with both of you. This is going to be fun and interesting, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot. So Ben, can you just talk a little bit about what we know today about people who have MS and their risks related to COVID?
Early on in the COVID pandemic, we could really only speculate about what COVID was going to mean for the MS community. Fortunately, now we have a lot of information. So we have real world experience from MS centers all around the world. We have the COVID MS registry in the United States. And the good news is that people with MS do not appear to be at higher risk for contracting COVID, and they don't appear to be getting sicker from it. So as you know, Roz and Megan, MS doesn't exist in a vacuum. So people with MS have other health issues. And so it's those other health issues that may actually determine a person's risk for getting COVID or getting sick with COVID. So things like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, COPD all play a risk factor. Here at Shepherd Center in Atlanta, about 45% of the MS community that we work with are people of African American descent. So we know that the Black community, the Latino community has been hit harder with COVID, and there are a lot of reasons why that might be. So those could be risk factors as well. So we want people with MS to be aware of COVID, but at the same time, we still are dealing with this sometimes misperception that people with MS have, that they are living with a weakened immune system, and we know that's not the case. People with MS have an immune system that works a little bit too well. It's picking up their brain and spinal cord, and while we are dealing with their MS, we can at least maybe alleviate some of that concern that there could be a higher risk of COVID, which we're not seeing.
Good news. So I'm sure you're getting many, many questions right now about the COVID vaccine. And what's your experience at Shepherd, and what are you telling your patients about getting the vaccine?
So we have, Roz, two vaccines available. These are two messenger RNA vaccines, one from Pfizer and one from Moderna. Myself, along with a lot of other people, have looked at the safety and efficacy packets that were presented by these companies to the FDA. And I didn't see any concerns in regards to safety as it might relate specifically to a person with MS. Now we have the guidance statement from the National MS Society. The National MS Society kindly put together a panel of experts to look at this data, and their recommendation was that the vaccines do not appear to be a safety concern for people with MS, and they would recommend that people with MS get vaccinated with whichever product they have access to, either the Pfizer or the Moderna product. I think it's a good idea. We had people who are frontline healthcare workers who have MS who had to make that decision before we had that guidance statement. And I will say, in our experience, those individuals have done just fine. We've not seen any health issues pop up. We would love to have 5 years of safety data with any of these vaccines. We don't have that. But when you think about the safety of vaccines, a lot of the side effects that we see really are not long-term side effects. They're right now side effects, allergic reactions, autoimmune reactions. And so we're not seeing any increased incidence of those things compared to other vaccines that are out there. We are going to hear about things. We're living in a very hyper-focused environment. These are new vaccines. The media is really paying attention to it. So, every time someone does have something happen, we're probably going to hear about it. But I would just encourage people, talk to your healthcare team, as it relates to the timing of their vaccination with medications, your disease modifying therapies. Talk to your team about that. In general, there's not any contraindication with timing. You might want to talk to your team specifically if you're on one of the B cell therapies, Ocrevus, Kesimpta, or Rituxan. But yeah, we're hoping that these vaccines are going to be the light at the end of the tunnel to get us all through this.
Thanks, Ben. That was really helpful. Could you just say a little bit more about the folks who are in the B cell disease modifying therapies?
Sure thing, Roz. So there was some concern early into the COVID pandemic, with some data coming out of Europe suggesting that perhaps people on B cell therapies had a little higher risk of hospitalization than people on other therapies. I would say in our experience, we've not seen that. So when you think about what these therapies are doing, they are working on a population of B cells. And when people are on an Ocrevus, a Rituxan, perhaps Kesimpta, newer drug with not as much data, we expect that their immune function is going to be fairly stable. So when is the ideal time to get a COVID vaccination as it relates to your every 6-month Ocrevus or Rituxan? We don't have studies that absolutely can give us guidance on this. Some researchers have suggested that exactly 3 months in between, so right in the middle of that 3-month window would be the best. Others have said, well, you know what, your immune function is pretty stable all throughout that 6-month course. I would say for us personally, we're saying 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after as a good guideline. I think we have to balance that timing out with the desire to get people vaccinated. So if someone says, listen, I have an opportunity to go now, maybe we want to say, okay, I know it's not 3 months, but it's still within that window. The other timing issue would be if someone's starting one of these therapies, ideally with a Rituxan or Ocrevus or Kesimpta. If you've not started that therapy first, ideally you'd like to get both of your COVID vaccines in 6 weeks prior to starting it, so you get really the full benefit of that vaccination.
Great.
Yeah, I think if I may, with those medications, we know that a person is not going to mount the same immune response that they would if they weren't on those medications, if they weren't on an immune modulating therapy. And that's based on other vaccine data. There haven't been studies with the COVID vaccine and these drugs. The other thing I think that's really important to talk to patients about is just side effects of the vaccine so that, they're not surprised, right? We know from the trials with Moderna and with Pfizer that it hurts. For many people, it's hard to raise your arm for a couple of days. For many people, they have a welt that might be similar to an old-fashioned disease-modifying therapy injection site reaction, and to make sure that is not getting bigger and looking infected, which we don't expect to see. We also do expect to see side effects like a low-grade fever or body aches and pains, or even COVID-type symptoms as your body develops that immune response to the spike protein that is, as I like to say to patients, Snapchatted, because you look at it once and then it goes away. So really, making sure that a person understands that they might feel not so great for a couple of days after the first vaccine. And what we're learning now is that response might even be harder after the booster in 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the shot that you get. So just expecting that makes you feel a little bit more at ease instead of, oh my gosh, I got COVID from the vaccine. No, your body is actually just having a normal response to recognizing something as a traitor and making sure that it doesn't get back in next time.
You work with a lot of folks with MS. What's been your experience? Are you seeing people sail through COVID? Are they requiring hospitalizations? How are your folks doing?
Yeah, so I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, and I have a really much, probably like you, a wide age range of patients. I have to say that most people who have had COVID have followed the statistics and that they've had mild illness, surprisingly, even if they have some of those other risk factors that really do put you at risk for more severe disease, the other medical conditions. And in fact, even older people have seemed to have done pretty well in my experience. And that's what the statistics tell us. Most people have mild disease. It's certainly not the picture that we see on the news every night, but I think there's more at this point with the number of people, unfortunately, that have suffered from COVID. We do have the ability to know that most people have mild disease, and that's something that we can at least have comfort about at this point. the vaccine, that question, I get asked a lot about my opinion. And my sense is that most Americans don't really have the emotional wherewithal or resources to survive another year of isolation, and really, thinking about herd immunity, and what science tells us is that 60 to 70% of people are required to have been recovered from COVID to have herd immunity. And it worries me about our country. What do you think, Roz?
So I think that as with everything else about human beings, some people have a lot of emotional resources and resilience and ability to cope with all kinds of stress. And some people may not have as many resources or have been tested in different ways in their lives. And so they're dealing with a lot of other emotional stresses at the same time they're dealing with COVID. But I think you're right, Megan, that this year has been incredibly difficult for all of us. And that many people living with MS have felt particularly vulnerable, and even more isolated than they may have felt before, just because of symptoms or their level of disability that interfered with their being as active and out in the community as they wanted to. So I think what we're seeing is families struggling, spending a little too much time together, emotions sometimes getting a little out of control, and not being comfortable because people don't have their normal outlets. And so we spend a lot of time working with people on how to have productive conversations when tensions get high, how to communicate in positive ways that keep the conversation moving, so nobody just retreats into their own corner, but also how to manage different levels of risk tolerance within a family. So you can have one family member who's just petrified of exposure and of what might happen and of getting sick, or petrified that their support partner, the person who is helping them and caring for them, gets sick. What happens? Then what will happen to me? So there are tremendous fears that people are experiencing. And so the advent of the vaccine, I think, is the light at the end of the tunnel to help people get through. And the sooner everyone is vaccinated, the sooner we can get out of our little huddles and reconnect with the world. But that brings up a question from me, Megan, because I know that you have an integrative medicine practice, and I know that for many individuals who feel strongly about holistic medicine or some aspects of integrative medicine, they have very strong feelings about the vaccine. So how do you handle that with your patients, since you clearly feel that vaccines are important?
Yeah, that's a great question. In integrative medicine, in that world, vaccinating is a controversial topic, and it becomes a very personalized decision. And I just share with patients my personal philosophy, which is backed by the science that we have now, and that is to recommend vaccination for people of highest risk, and then follow the categories as we as the vaccination is rolled out, and we know that it's available. And when someone tells me that they are completely against vaccination, then we have a discussion about following safety protocols and continuing to wear masks and social distancing, which is recommended even after a person gets vaccinated. So again, it just goes back to using the science that we have, which is so much greater than what we had 10 months ago, right? We know what we can do to protect ourselves, and it's my personal opinion that people need to, consider vaccination as health prevention.
So I have one follow-up question for you about that. So when a person gets a vaccine
Mhm.
is primarily self-protection, right? You want people to do it so that they don't get sick and suffer the consequences of the illness. But in a situation like COVID, when one person gets vaccinated and then cumulatively lots of people get vaccinated, doesn't each vaccinated person then benefit all the people around them?
Absolutely. And that's, that brings up the whole point about continuing to mask and social distance, even if that's not what you believe you need to do, if not for yourself, then for others. So yes, the vaccination isn't just for you. It's for those around you. It's for, your daughter who cares for your grandmother. It's multi-generational, and kids, certainly, we as we know, kids don't seem to develop the same degree of illness, but they're certainly little typhoid Marys, as my mom likes to call them. So they are the highest group of asymptomatic carriers. And so, a vaccinated grandparent who's caring for a child is then protected. And then in the community of the family is taken care of. So it's not just about one person. It really truly is about a large neighborhood of people. You think if one child is infected by COVID, a whole classroom goes home for 2 weeks. That's 20 to 30 kids, 60 parents, 60 to 120 siblings home.
Home. So,
Yeah.
Your mom calls them typhoid Marys. In my household, when the kids were little, we talked about their classrooms being little petri dishes.
Petri dishes, yeah.
Everything would come home and get the rest of us sick.
Yeah. So that's a good point.
So Ben, are those same questions coming up at Shepherd for people who question the value or safety of vaccines?
Absolutely. It's been such an interesting discussion to have with people. And it seems like whether you're talking to a fellow healthcare provider or talking to a person with MS or their family member, everyone kind of comes into the discussion with their own sort of concerns and maybe biases. And I don't think I've ever seen a medical discussion have sort of an underlying political, tone to it. And when we have a discussion with someone about a disease modifying therapy for their multiple sclerosis, we never had to think, well, is this person liberal? Are they conservative? Are they, libertarian? At the end of the day, this is a virus, and this virus doesn't care about your politics at all. It's biological. And so we're trying to get people to step back and say, listen, the world has been a very noisy place over the past couple of years, and we need to tone that out and really look at what's best for you medically. As it relates to integrative medicine, I think of ideal MS care as being both comprehensive and integrative. And so we want people with MS to use every tool in their toolbox to live their best possible life. And so now we're faced with this COVID pandemic that has added a layer of healthcare challenge on top of the MS that the person's already dealing with. And I think the best way for us to move past this is for people to look at the risks and benefits of these COVID vaccines. I think even for us as healthcare providers, we had to kind of step back and say, you know what, this messenger RNA technology is new. I think a lot of us had to review our cell biology and say, okay, well, let's refresh our memory. And so my wife is a pediatrician, for me as a neurologist, we independently, sort of went back and looked at the safety data and said, okay, what does messenger RNA do? It's a blueprint for a protein. It never gets into the cell nucleus where the DNA lives. So when our body sees this messenger RNA, it's going to follow that blueprint and make that COVID spike protein to make our immune system think that we have the infection and make an appropriate immune response. When you transcribe that messenger RNA, it's gone. It's not sticking around in your body. We've heard people express concerns that this is altering your DNA somehow, and that is absolutely not true. So this messenger RNA, it's transcribed, it's gone, it's a done deal. We've heard people express concerns that you could get COVID infection from the vaccination. Again, absolutely not true. There is no virus in this messenger RNA vaccination. It's just the blueprint for that spike protein. So I think, we've really been challenged with, educating ourselves so that we can educate and reassure people with MS and their families. I think it's been our duty as healthcare providers to step up to the front and say, okay, we believe that this vaccine is safe and we're willing to take it ourselves. Talking to my team members, the biggest reason that I heard from my team members that they wanted to get vaccinated was not to protect themselves, is because they didn't want to give COVID to a person with MS, a coworker, like Megan was saying, a friend or a family member at home. So yes, it's been such a fascinating time, but I think, hopefully through programs like this and in discussions, we can reassure people. I think as more and more people are vaccinated and we see that we're not seeing any unusual side effects, hopefully people will be reassured by that.
I think that's an incredibly reassuring message. And I just wanted to add one more related to what Megan asked me before about emotional resources. And one of the things that has occurred to me during all of this is how resilient individuals affected by MS truly are and how resilient they have had to learn to be. And when you think about what we've learned from our patients, all three of us, they have learned to live with unpredictability. They've learned to live with being restricted in what they can and can't do sometimes. They've learned to deal with some isolation from some people in their lives. So in many ways, they had a jump start on us. And personally, I've learned a lot from them about how to cope for myself with this pandemic, which has created such unpredictability, such fear, such restrictions, such isolation. So I think we have a lot to thank our patients for teaching us how to live through something like this.